In the middle of our wedding, my husband suddenly slapped me in front of everyone, and what I did next destroyed his entire world. My name is Caroline, and this is the story of how one moment of violence became the catalyst for the most empowering decision of my life. The morning of my wedding day started like something out of a fairy tale. I woke up in my childhood bedroom, sunlight streaming through the lace curtains my mother had hung when I was just a girl. The June air was warm and fragrant, with the scent of roses from our garden. My bridesmaids arrived early, their laughter filling the house as we prepared for what was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. My sister Emma kept making jokes about how I was finally tying the knot after dating Marcus for 3 years. My best friend Sophia was meticulously arranging my veil, her fingers gentle as she worked. Everything felt perfect, almost too perfect, like the calm before a storm I didn't know was coming. Marcus and I had met at a corporate training seminar in downtown Chicago. He was charming, successful, and seemed to have his life completely together. He worked in finance, drove a luxury car, and always knew exactly what to say to make me feel special. Our courtship was a whirlwind of expensive dinners, weekend getaways, and grand romantic gestures that made all my friends envious. He proposed on a beach in the Bahamas at sunset, getting down on one knee with a diamond ring that sparkled like captured starlight. I said yes without hesitation, convinced I had found my soulmate, the man I would grow old with. But there were signs I chose to ignore. Small things at first. The way Marcus would tense up when I disagreed with him about minor decisions. How his smile would fade when I spent time with my friends without him. The subtle comments about my clothes, my makeup, my choices. He would frame these criticisms as concern, saying he just wanted me to be the best version of myself. I told myself he was protective, not controlling. I convinced myself that his occasional flashes of anger were just stress from work, nothing to worry about. Looking back now, I see how expertly he was laying the groundwork, testing boundaries, seeing how much I would tolerate. If you're enjoying this story and want to hear more real-life experiences like this one, please click that subscribe button. We're working toward our goal of 1,000 subscribers, and your support means everything to this channel. The ceremony was held at St. Catherine's Church, a beautiful stone building with stained glass windows that painted rainbow patterns across the pews. 200 guests filled the space, family and friends who had traveled from across the country to celebrate with us. My father walked me down the aisle, his arms steady under mine, pride radiating from every step he took. I could see Marcus waiting at the altar in his perfectly tailored tuxedo, his dark hair slicked back, his posture confident. The organ music swelled around us, and I felt like I was floating, completely unaware that I was walking toward a moment that would change everything. The ceremony proceeded smoothly. We exchanged our vows, our voices steady and clear. Marcus slipped the wedding band onto my finger, and I did the same for him. The priest smiled warmly as he guided us through each traditional element of the service. When it came time to light the unity candle, Marcus and I stood side by side, our individual flames merging into one. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone in that church. We were becoming one unit, one family, bound together by love and commitment. At least, that's what everyone believed they were witnessing. Then came the moment for our first kiss as husband and wife. The priest announced it with genuine warmth in his voice, and the congregation leaned forward in anticipation. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for, the romantic culmination of the entire ceremony. Marcus turned to me, and for a split second, I saw something in his eyes that made my stomach clench. It was a look I had seen before, during our arguments when he thought I had embarrassed him in front of his colleagues, or when I had contradicted him at a family dinner. But surely not here, not now, not in front of everyone we knew and loved. Instead of leaning in to kiss me, Marcus grabbed my face roughly with both hands. His fingers dug into my cheeks with painful pressure. Before I could process what was happening, before I could even draw breath to speak, his right hand pulled back and came forward in a swift, brutal arc. The slap connected with the left side of my face with a crack that echoed through the church like a gunshot. The force of it turned my head sharply to the side, and I felt the sting spread across my cheek like fire. My veil shifted, partially covering my face, and for a moment, everything went completely silent. The shock was absolute. 200 people sat frozen in their seats, their mouths open, their eyes wide with disbelief. My bridesmaids gasped in unison, behind me. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. My father started to rise from his seat, his face turning red with rage. Emma let out a small cry of horror. The priest took a step backward, his book of ceremonies dropping from his hands and hitting the floor with a thud that seemed impossibly loud in the sudden quiet. Marcus stood there, his hand still raised slightly, his chest heaving, looking at me with an expression that mixed anger with something else, something like satisfaction. Please take a moment to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. Your subscription helps us share more stories like Caroline's, and we're so close to reaching 1,000 subscribers. Just click the red button below this video. In that moment, time seemed to stretch and bend. I could feel the heat radiating from my cheek, where he had struck me. I could taste blood where my teeth had cut the inside of my mouth. I could hear my own heartbeat thundering in my ears. But more than any physical sensation, I felt something else rising inside me. Not shame, not fear, not the desire to cry or run away or pretend this hadn't happened. What I felt was clarity, pure and sharp as broken glass. This was who Marcus really was. This was the man I had almost bound myself to forever. And in front of all these witnesses, he had shown his true nature. I reached up slowly and lifted my veil completely off my face. My movements were deliberate, controlled. I looked Marcus straight in the eyes, holding his gaze without flinching, without looking away. I saw the exact moment when he realized I wasn't going to cower. I saw confusion flash across his face, then something like worry. He had expected tears, apologies, submission. He had expected me to crumble. Instead, I stood taller, lifting my chin high, my spine straight as steel. The left side of my face was already starting to swell. I could feel it, but I didn't care. Let everyone see what he had done. I turned away from Marcus and faced the congregation. Every single person was staring at me, waiting to see what would happen next. My family looked devastated. My friends looked horrified. Marcus's family sat rigid in their pews, his mother's face pale as death, his father's jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscles working. The priest stood off to the side, clearly having no idea how to handle this situation. No one was breathing. The entire church felt like it was holding its collective breath. When I spoke, my voice was steady and clear, carrying to every corner of that sacred space. I didn't shout. I didn't need to. The silence was so complete that everyone heard every single word. "This marriage is over before it began," I said, looking directly at my parents, then at my sister, then sweeping my gaze across all the faces I loved. You all just witnessed who Marcus really is. This is not the first time he has shown me this side of himself, but it will absolutely be the last. I will not marry a man who thinks violence is acceptable. I will not spend one more second pretending this relationship is something it's not. I heard my mother sob, but it wasn't a sad sound. It was relief mixed with pride. My father was already moving up the aisle toward me, his arms open. Emma was right behind him, but I held on my hand, stopping them for just a moment. I wasn't finished. Help us grow this community by subscribing to the channel. We're building something special here, sharing real stories from real people, and we'd love for you to be part of it. Click that subscribe button and join us on the journey to 1,000 subscribers. I turned back to Marcus, who was now looking around wildly, realizing that his world was collapsing. He tried to reach for me, tried to say my name, but I took a step backward, putting space between us. "You just destroyed your own life," I told him quietly, but with absolute conviction. "Everyone here saw what you did. Your family, your friends, your colleagues from work. You humiliated yourself far more than you could ever humiliate me. I'm walking out of here with my dignity intact. Can you say the same?" Then I did something I had practiced during our rehearsal, but never imagined doing under these circumstances. I removed the engagement ring from my left hand and the wedding band he had just placed there moments before the slap. I held them out, but instead of giving them back to him, I dropped them. They hit the marble floor with a delicate tinkling sound, bouncing once, twice, then rolling away toward the first row of pews. The symbolism was perfect. I was literally dropping him, discarding him, rejecting everything he represented. The spell broke. Suddenly everyone was moving at once. My father reached me first, wrapping me in his arms so tightly I could barely breathe. My mother was crying openly now, touching my face gently where Marcus had struck me. Emma was shouting something at Marcus, her voice shaking with fury. Sophia and my other bridesmaids surrounded me like a protective wall. From Marcus's side of the church, I heard his mother wailing, his father's voice rising in what sounded like rage directed at his son. Several of Marcus's groomsmen were standing around him, but none of them were offering comfort. They were staring at him like they had never seen him before, like he was a stranger. The priest found his voice and suggested we all move to the church's community room to sort things out. But I shook my head. There was nothing to sort out. This was over, completely and irrevocably over. I gathered my family and closest friends and told them I wanted to leave immediately. My father asked if I wanted to go to the hospital or file a police report. I told him I would do both, but first I needed to get out of this building, out of this dress, away from this nightmare. As we walked down the aisle toward the exit, I held my head high. My cheek throbbed with pain, and I knew I probably looked terrible with my makeup smeared and one side of my face turning purple. But I had never felt more powerful in my entire life. Behind me, I could hear Marcus trying to explain, trying to make excuses, his voice desperate and pathetic. No one was listening to him. His best man said something cutting that I couldn't quite make out, but the tone was unmistakably disgusted. Marcus's own father told him to shut his mouth. The tide had turned completely against him. Outside the church, the June sunshine felt like a blessing on my skin. The wedding photographer was standing by his equipment, looking confused about whether he should still be taking pictures. My father told him to leave. The limousine that was supposed to take Marcus and me to our reception sat empty at the curb, white ribbons still tied to the door handles. The reception venue was already set up, I knew. 300 guests were supposed to arrive there in an hour for dinner and dancing. My mother pulled out her phone and started making calls to cancel everything while we stood on the church steps. If this story is resonating with you, please show your support by subscribing to our channel. We're working hard to reach 1,000 subscribers, and every single subscription matters. Click that button and become part of our growing community. Emma took off her bridesmaid shawl and draped it over my shoulders even though it wasn't cold. The gesture was protective, caring, and it made me realize how much I needed my family right now. Sophia brought me water from somewhere, holding the bottle to my lips because my hands were shaking too much to hold it steady. Other guests were starting to file out of the church now, many of them crying, all of them looking at me with expressions of concern and admiration. Several people I barely knew came up to tell me I had done the right thing, that I was brave, that they were proud of me. Marcus emerged from the church about 15 minutes later, surrounded by his parents and a few uncomfortable-looking groomsmen. He tried to catch my eye, tried to approach me, but my father stepped in front of me like a wall. Marcus's father was speaking to him in harsh, clipped tones, and I could see Marcus's face crumbling. His mother was crying and wouldn't even look at him. In one moment of violence, he had destroyed not just our relationship but his standing with his own family. I felt no sympathy for him whatsoever. My father drove me home in his car, my mother and sister following in another vehicle. During that drive, my father kept glancing over at me, his hands tight on the steering wheel. Finally, he spoke. "Caroline, I need you to know something," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "If you had gone through with that marriage, if you had tried to excuse what he did or minimize it, I would have supported you because you're my daughter and I love you. But I would have died a little inside watching you chain yourself to that man. What you did back there, standing up for yourself in front of everyone, that took more courage than most people show in their entire lives. I have never been more proud of you." Those words broke through the shock that had been insulating me. I started to cry, really cry, for the first time since the slap. My father pulled over on the side of the road and held me while I sobbed, all the fear and pain and relief pouring out of me at once. I cried for the relationship I thought I had. I cried for the future I had imagined. I cried for the version of myself who had ignored so many warning signs. But mostly, I cried because I was free. At home, my mother insisted on taking photos of my face from multiple angles, documenting the injury for legal purposes. The left side of my face was swollen and deeply bruised, the imprint of Marcus's fingers visible in darker purple marks. My mother's hands shook as she took the pictures, and I knew she was fighting the urge to drive back to that church and confront Marcus herself. Emma helped me out of my wedding dress, carefully unhooking each tiny button down the back. We folded it and put it in a box. I would never wear it again, obviously, but somehow throwing it away felt premature. Maybe I would donate it, or burn it in some kind of closure ritual. For now, it went into the back of my closet. I changed into comfortable clothes, sweatpants, and an old college t-shirt, and the transformation felt significant. I was no longer bride Caroline in her elaborate gown and veil. I was just Caroline figuring out what came next. My father made calls to our attorney, explaining what had happened and asking about options for annulment. Technically, we were married. The papers had been signed before the ceremony, but given the circumstances, an annulment would be straightforward. The attorney also recommended filing an assault report with the police, creating an official record of what Marcus had done. Please consider subscribing if you're finding value in this story. We're building a community of people who believe in standing up for themselves and others, and we'd be honored to have you join us. Help us reach our goal of 1,000 subscribers by clicking that subscribe button. That evening, my house filled with family and friends. The people who had been at the church, the people who were supposed to be at the reception, they all came to check on me. Someone ordered pizza. Someone else brought wine. My living room became an impromptu gathering of everyone I loved, and instead of celebrating a wedding, we celebrated my escape. People kept telling me their own stories of times they had stayed in bad relationships too long, or times they wished they had been as brave as I was. Emma's best friend told me about her abusive ex-husband and how she had spent 5 years in misery before finally leaving. My cousin shared that she had almost married someone who showed warning signs she ignored, and she broke off the engagement 2 weeks before the wedding. The stories kept coming, and I realized how common this was, how many people had been where I was. Around 10 that night, my phone started buzzing constantly with calls and texts from Marcus. I blocked his number, without reading any of the messages. He tried calling from different numbers, probably borrowing phones from friends or family. I blocked those too. He sent emails that I deleted without opening. He was panicking, I could tell, realizing that there was no coming back from this, no way to explain or excuse what he had done. 200 witnesses had seen him hit me. In the age of smartphones, I would be shocked if multiple people hadn't recorded it. His reputation was destroyed, his social standing demolished, his career likely damaged once word got around. And all of it was his own fault. The next morning, I went to the police station with my father and filed a formal assault report. The officer who took my statement was a middle-aged woman with kind eyes who told me she had seen too many victims who didn't report, who tried to protect their abusers, who made excuses. She seemed genuinely relieved that I was taking action immediately. The photos my mother had taken were submitted as evidence. The officer explained that Marcus could potentially face criminal charges, and at minimum, I would have an official record if I ever needed a restraining order. I left that police station feeling even more empowered. I was not hiding what had happened. I was not ashamed. I had done nothing wrong. Over the next few days, the story spread through our social circles like wildfire. Some people reached out to express support. Others seemed to be fishing for gossip or drama. I ignored the latter and appreciated the former. Marcus's employer somehow found out what had happened, probably through mutual connections, and I heard through the grapevine that he was placed on administrative leave while they conducted an internal investigation. Apparently, his company had a zero-tolerance policy for domestic violence, and they were considering termination. I felt no guilt about this. His choices had consequences, and he was finally facing them. Marcus's mother called me 4 days after the wedding, her voice tentative and strained. She apologized profusely for her son's actions, said she had no idea he was capable of such violence, and begged me to understand that she had raised him better than this. I listened politely, but told her I had no interest in understanding Marcus or giving him another chance. She started to cry, saying her son's life was falling apart. I told her, as gently as I could, that Marcus had no one to blame but himself. She asked if I would consider talking to him, hearing him out, maybe going to counseling. I said no, firmly and finally. That was the last conversation I had with anyone from Marcus's family. Remember to hit that subscribe button if this story is speaking to you. We're so grateful for this community we're building together, and we'd love to have you as part of our journey to 1,000 subscribers. Your support means everything. The annulment process moved forward quickly. Because the marriage had lasted literally minutes and because there was documented abuse, the court was willing to fast-track everything. I had to appear before a judge and recount what happened, which was difficult but necessary. The judge, an older man with a stern face, looked genuinely angry as I described the slap in front of the congregation. He granted the annulment without hesitation and even commended me for my swift action. Within 3 weeks of what should have been my wedding day, I was legally single again, as if the marriage had never existed. During those weeks, I did a lot of soul-searching. I went to therapy to process not just the trauma of the slap, but also the relationship dynamics that had led me to ignore so many red flags. My therapist helped me understand that Marcus had been exhibiting classic signs of an abuser, gradually escalating his control and testing my boundaries. The slap at the wedding wasn't random or spontaneous. It was the result of him feeling emboldened, feeling like he owned me now that we were married, feeling like he could finally drop the mask completely. If I had stayed, if I had married him and gone on that honeymoon and started our life together, the abuse would have continued and worsened. The therapist helped me see that by walking away immediately, I had potentially saved myself years of suffering. I also spent time reconnecting with myself, figuring out who Caroline was outside of the relationship with Marcus. I had lost parts of myself during those 3 years, compromising on things I cared about, diminishing my own opinions to keep the peace, making myself smaller to accommodate his ego. Now I had the chance to reclaim all of that. I started painting again, something I had loved in college but had abandoned because Marcus thought it was a waste of time. I reconnected with friends I had drifted away from because Marcus didn't like them. I made plans for my future that centered entirely on what I wanted, not what would make a hypothetical partner happy. 2 months after the wedding that wasn't, I ran into one of Marcus's groomsmen at a coffee shop downtown. He recognized me immediately and approached cautiously, probably worried I would be angry at him by association. But he seemed genuine, so I let him talk. He told me that Marcus's life had completely imploded. He had been fired from his job. Most of his friends had distanced themselves from him. His parents had cut off financial support and were insisting he go to therapy and anger management classes. He had moved out of the upscale apartment he could no longer afford and was living in a much smaller place on the outskirts of the city. The groomsmen said Marcus was playing the victim, acting like everyone had abandoned him unfairly, refusing to take real responsibility for his actions. The groomsman then said something that stuck with me. He said he had known Marcus since college, and looking back, he could see signs of this behavior that he had dismissed or excused over the years. The way Marcus talked about his ex-girlfriends. The way he reacted when things didn't go his way. The controlling comments disguised as jokes. The groomsman apologized for not seeing it clearly before, for not warning me, for standing up there at that altar while Marcus prepared to hit me. I told him that wasn't his fault, but I appreciated the apology. Before he left, he said, "What you did took guts. You probably saved your own life. I hope you know that." Your subscription to this channel helps us continue sharing powerful stories like Caroline's. We're working toward 1,000 subscribers, and we're getting closer every day thanks to viewers like you. Please click that subscribe button and join our community. As the months passed, I started to feel less like a person who had escaped something terrible and more like a person who was actively building something beautiful. I got a promotion at work, taking on a leadership role I had been too timid to pursue when I was with Marcus. I traveled to places I had always wanted to see but Marcus had deemed uninteresting. I dated casually, nothing serious, just enjoying the process of meeting new people without the pressure of finding a husband. I spent quality time with my family, deepening those relationships that had sustained me through the worst day of my life. Emma told me that I seemed lighter, happier, more like my old self from before I met Marcus. She said it was like watching a flower bloom after a long winter. My mother said I smiled more genuinely now, that my eyes had light in them again. My father said he no longer worried about me the way he had worried during my engagement, when he could sense something was wrong but didn't know how to intervene without pushing me away. They were all right. I was free in a way I hadn't been for 3 years. 1 year after the slap, I organized a small dinner party with my closest friends and family. We gathered in my apartment, which I had redecorated to reflect my own taste rather than any compromise. I cooked dishes I loved, played music I enjoyed, wore an outfit that made me feel confident and beautiful. During dessert, I stood up and made a toast. 1 year ago today, I said, looking around at all the faces I loved, I experienced one of the worst moments of my life. But it was also the moment I found my strength. Thank you all for standing by me, for supporting me, for reminding me who I am when I had forgotten. Here's to freedom, to self-respect, and to never settling for less than we deserve. Everyone raised their glasses, and I saw tears in several eyes, including my own. We weren't crying from sadness, but from joy, from pride, from the recognition of how far I had come. The bruise on my face had long since healed, leaving no physical scar. The emotional wounds had healed too, slowly but surely, leaving me not broken but stronger. I later heard that Marcus had moved to another state, trying to start over somewhere his reputation hadn't preceded him. I felt neither satisfaction nor sympathy at this news. I simply felt nothing. He was a chapter of my life that had closed, a lesson learned, a mistake I would never repeat. I hoped he would get the help he needed, not for my sake but for the sake of any future partners he might have. But ultimately, his journey was no longer my concern. Before we wrap up this story, I want to ask one more time for your support. If you've been moved by Caroline's experience, if you believe in the importance of sharing these kinds of stories, please subscribe to our channel. We're so close to reaching 1,000 subscribers, and your click makes a real difference. Join this community of people who believe in courage, self-respect, and standing up for what's right. Looking back now, 2 years after that day in the church, I can say with absolute certainty that the slap was a twisted blessing. It revealed the truth in the most undeniable way possible. If Marcus had waited until after the wedding, until we were on our honeymoon or living in our new house or after I was pregnant with his child, the situation would have been infinitely more complicated. I might have felt trapped. I might have tried to make it work. I might have spent years in an abusive marriage before finding the strength to leave. But because he showed his true colors in front of 200 witnesses, in the middle of a sacred ceremony, in a moment that should have been pure love, he gave me the clearest possible choice and the strongest possible motivation to walk away. I've been asked many times if I regret the 3 years I spent with Marcus, if I feel like I wasted that time. The answer is no. Those 3 years taught me valuable lessons about red flags, about the importance of listening to my instincts, about the difference between love and control. They taught me what I don't want in a partner, which is just as important as knowing what I do want. And they taught me that I have a core of strength inside me that can emerge when I need it most. My life now is everything I could have hoped for. I'm in a healthy relationship with someone who treats me with consistent respect and kindness. We've been together for 8 months, and not once has he tried to control me, diminish me, or make me feel small. When I told him the story of my almost wedding, he was horrified and angry on my behalf, but he also said he was grateful that I had learned to recognize the warning signs because it meant our relationship could be built on a foundation of genuine equality and mutual respect. I don't know if this relationship will last forever, but I know that if it doesn't work out, I will walk away with my head held high, just like I did at that church. I've also become an advocate for domestic violence awareness. I volunteer at a local shelter, helping women who are trying to leave abusive situations. I share my story when it's appropriate, Not for attention or sympathy, but because I know how powerful it can be to hear from someone who has been there and come out the other side. Many of the women I work with tell me that my story gives them hope, shows them that it's possible to walk away, that immediate and decisive action is not only possible but necessary. The church where the wedding took place has become, oddly enough, a symbol of empowerment for me rather than trauma. I drove past it a few months ago and felt nothing but pride. That's where I stood up for myself. That's where I chose me. That's where I refused to accept unacceptable treatment. The priest who presided over the ceremony reached out to me about 6 months after everything happened. He said in his 30 years of performing weddings, he had never witnessed anything like what happened that day. He apologized for not knowing what to do in the moment, for not protecting me better. I told him there was nothing he could have done that I didn't do for myself. He said my response had changed the way he counsels engaged couples, that he now addresses domestic violence explicitly in premarital counseling, asking difficult questions, and watching for warning signs. If you've watched this far, thank you for listening to Caroline's story. Stories like this need to be told, heard, and shared. They remind us all of the importance of self-respect and the power of decisive action. Please subscribe to help us reach our goal of 1,000 subscribers so we can continue bringing these important stories to light. My family has healed too. My father says he no longer has nightmares about me being trapped in an abusive marriage. My mother has stopped apologizing for not seeing the signs earlier. Emma jokes that she's extra protective of her own relationship now, more aware of subtle red flags after witnessing what I went through. We're all closer than we were before, bonded by that experience and by the collective understanding of what it means to truly show up for someone you love. The wedding dress that I carefully boxed up on that terrible day stayed in my closet for about a year before I finally decided what to do with it. I donated it to an organization that provides wedding dresses to military brides who can't afford them. I figured someone should get some joy out of that expensive gown, and at least it would be associated with a real wedding, a happy wedding, a wedding that actually resulted in a marriage. When I dropped it off, the woman running the organization asked if there was a story behind the dress. I told her, briefly, what had happened. She hugged me tight and said, "You're a warrior." I carried those words with me for weeks. People sometimes ask if I'm afraid Marcus will try to contact me again or retaliate in some way. The honest answer is no. He revealed himself to be a coward that day in the church. He's the kind of man who hits someone smaller and weaker when he thinks he has power over them, but who crumbles when faced with real consequences. He destroyed his own life more effectively than I ever could have. And he knows that if he comes near me, I won't hesitate to get law enforcement involved. The police report I filed is permanent. The photos of my bruised face are permanent. His actions are documented, undeniable, and would follow him into any courtroom. I want to be clear about something important. What I did, walking away immediately and publicly, worked for my specific situation. I had witnesses. I had family support. I had resources and options. Many people in abusive relationships don't have these advantages, and leaving can be incredibly dangerous. I don't judge anyone who stays or who takes longer to leave. Every situation is unique, and survival sometimes means staying until the moment is right. I was lucky that my moment of clarity came when it did in a public place with people around who could support me. Not everyone has that. So while I'm proud of what I did, I'm also aware that my story is not a prescription for how everyone should handle abuse. It's just my story, one example of one woman who had the right circumstances and the right moment to make a decisive break. One more thing I want to share before we close. About 6 months ago, I received a letter forwarded through my attorney. It was from Marcus. I debated whether to open it, discussed it with my therapist, and finally decided to read it with my sister present for support. The letter was long and rambling, full of apologies and explanations and requests for forgiveness. He claimed he had been going to therapy and anger management. He said he understood why I left. He asked if we could ever speak again, not to get back together, but for closure. I read it twice, then I tore it up and threw it away. I didn't need his apologies. I didn't need his explanations. I certainly didn't need closure from him. My closure came the moment I walked out of that church with my head held high. Thank you for being part of this community and for listening to this story. If it resonated with you, if you believe these stories matter, please click that subscribe button. We're building something special here, a place where real experiences are shared and real strength is celebrated. Help us reach 1,000 subscribers and continue growing this important community. In the end, the wedding day that was supposed to be the beginning of my happily ever after became the day I saved my own life. The slap that was meant to diminish me became the catalyst for my empowerment. The public humiliation Marcus intended for me became his own destruction. And the marriage that everyone thought they came to witness became instead a powerful demonstration of self-respect, boundaries, and the courage to choose yourself even when it's hard, even when it's public, even when it means destroying the future you thought you wanted in order to build the future you deserve. I am Caroline, and I am free. I am strong. I am whole. And I will never again allow anyone to treat me as anything less than I am worth. That day in the church, surrounded by family and friends, with my face stinging from violence I didn't deserve, I made a choice that changed everything. I chose me, and I have never regretted it for a single second. The months that followed my decision became a masterclass in rebuilding. I learned that strength isn't just about the moment you say no or the moment you walk away. Real strength is in the daily choice to keep moving forward when everything inside you wants to curl up and hide from the world. There were mornings when I woke up and the first thought in my mind was of Marcus, of what could have been, of the life I had planned that no longer existed. On those mornings, I had to consciously choose to get out of bed, to shower, to dress, to face another day of building something new from the ruins of what I thought I wanted. My workplace became an unexpected sanctuary during this time. I had been worried about returning to the office after everything that happened, concerned about the gossip and the questions and the pitying looks. But my colleagues surprised me with their support and discretion. My boss, a woman named Patricia, who had always been professional but somewhat distant, called me into her office 3 days after I returned to work. I expected an awkward conversation about my personal life affecting my professional performance. Instead, she closed the door, sat down across from me, and told me her own story. Patricia had been in an abusive marriage for 7 years. Her ex-husband never hit her in public, never left visible marks, but the psychological abuse had been relentless and devastating. She stayed because she was ashamed, because she thought she could fix him, because leaving felt impossible. When she finally did leave, she was 38 years old and felt like she had wasted the best years of her life. She told me that watching me walk away immediately, publicly, decisively, had filled her with an emotion she couldn't quite name. Part admiration, part envy, part relief that women of my generation seemed to have a stronger sense of their own worth than women of hers had been taught to have. That conversation changed my relationship with Patricia and with my work. She became not just a boss, but a mentor, someone who understood what I was going through on a level most people couldn't. She gave me projects that challenged me, responsibilities that forced me to focus on something other than my personal trauma. Within 6 months, she recommended me for the promotion I mentioned earlier, telling the executive team that I had demonstrated resilience, leadership, and clarity of judgment under pressure. The promotion came with a significant raise and a new title, and while it didn't erase what had happened, it gave me tangible proof that my life was moving in a positive direction. Subscribe to our channel if you're enjoying Caroline's journey. We're grateful for every single person who joins our community, and we're working hard to reach that milestone of 1,000 subscribers. Your support makes these stories possible. I also discovered the power of creative expression during my healing process. The painting I had returned to became more than just a hobby. It became a way to process emotions I couldn't articulate with words. I painted abstract pieces that represented my anger, swirling reds and blacks that seemed to pulse with rage. I painted soft watercolors that captured the sadness and grief of losing the future I had imagined. I painted bold, bright acrylics that celebrated my freedom and my strength. My sister Emma, who worked in marketing, suggested I display some of my work at a local coffee shop that featured rotating artists. I was hesitant at first, worried about being vulnerable in yet another public way. But I agreed, and the response was overwhelming. People connected with my art in ways I hadn't anticipated. Several pieces sold within the first 2 weeks. A local gallery owner reached out and asked if I would be interested in a small solo show. Women came to the coffee shop specifically to meet me, to tell me their own stories, to thank me for creating something that spoke to their experiences. One woman, probably in her 60s, stood in front of my painting titled "The Moment of No" for nearly 20 minutes, tears streaming down her face. When she finally approached me, she said she had stayed in an abusive marriage for 42 years because she didn't think she had the right to leave. My art, and the brief description I had written about the inspiration behind it, had given her permission to acknowledge her own pain. That interaction stayed with me for weeks. It reinforced something my therapist had been telling me, that by being open about my experience, by refusing to hide in shame, I was creating space for other people to heal too. It wasn't about being a hero or a role model. It was simply about telling the truth and letting that truth resonate with people who needed to hear it. The dating world, when I eventually re-entered it, was both easier and harder than I expected. Easier because I now had absolute clarity about what I would and would not tolerate. Harder because I was hyper-vigilant about red flags, sometimes seeing danger where there was none. My first few dates after Marcus were disasters of my own making. I would interrogate men about their past relationships, their views on conflict, their communication styles. I was so focused on screening out potential abusers that I forgot to relax and actually get to know people as human beings. My therapist helped me find a balance between being cautious and being open. She taught me to trust my instincts while also recognizing that not every disagreement was a warning sign, not every strong personality was a controlling one. She helped me understand that I could be vigilant without being paranoid, careful without being closed off. The process was gradual, but eventually, I learned to date in a healthier way, approaching new relationships with optimism tempered by wisdom rather than with fear disguised as protection. When I met Daniel, the man I mentioned earlier, it was at a community volunteer event. He was helping organize a fundraiser for the domestic violence shelter, where I volunteered, working with the logistics and coordination. We ended up on the same committee, planning details of the event over several weeks. What struck me about Daniel from the beginning was his consistency. He was exactly the same person in every context, whether he was talking to me, to the shelter director, to the caterer, or to the teenage volunteer who accidentally spilled coffee on his laptop. He was patient, respectful, and genuinely kind. There was no performative niceness that disappeared when things got difficult. There was no charming persona that masked something darker underneath. If you haven't subscribed yet, now would be a great time to click that button. We're sharing stories that matter, building a community that supports courage and authenticity, and we'd love to have you with us on this journey to 1,000 subscribers. Our first real conversation happened after a particularly long committee meeting. Everyone else had left, but Daniel and I stayed to clean up, putting away chairs and throwing away the pizza boxes from dinner. He asked me how I got involved with the domestic violence shelter, and I found myself telling him the abbreviated version of my story. I watched his face carefully as I spoke, looking for any sign of judgment or discomfort or inappropriate curiosity. What I saw instead was genuine empathy and quiet anger on my behalf. When I finished talking, he was silent for a moment, then said, "I'm sorry that happened to you. And I'm impressed by your strength, but I'm also just sorry it was necessary." That response meant everything to me. He didn't try to fix anything or offer unsolicited advice. He didn't make it about himself or try to prove he was different from Marcus. He simply acknowledged my pain and my strength in equal measure, holding space for both truths simultaneously. That moment of genuine connection felt like a gift, and it marked the beginning of something that grew slowly and steadily into a real relationship. Dating Daniel was nothing like dating Marcus. There were no grand romantic gestures designed to sweep me off my feet. There were no expensive gifts or elaborate surprises meant to dazzle me into compliance. Instead, there were small, consistent acts of consideration. He remembered details from conversations we had weeks earlier. He asked about my art and genuinely listened when I talked about my creative process. He respected my boundaries without making me feel like I was being difficult or demanding. When I told him I wasn't comfortable with certain displays of public affection because they made me feel exposed, he simply said okay and adjusted his behavior. No arguments, no accusations of me being uptight, no attempts to push past my limits. The first time Daniel and I had a disagreement, my heart started racing and my palms got sweaty. We were trying to decide where to go for dinner, and he wanted Italian food while I wanted Thai. It was completely trivial, but in that moment, all my old trauma responses kicked in. I could feel myself preparing for anger, for manipulation, for the punishment that would come from daring to have a different preference. But Daniel just laughed and said, "Okay, Thai sounds great. I can have Italian anytime." It was that simple. No power struggle, no resentment, no keeping score. Just two people with different preferences finding an easy compromise. Later that night, after dinner, I told Daniel what had been going through my mind during that exchange. He listened carefully, then took my hand and said, "Caroline, I need you to understand something. Your preferences matter to me. Your comfort matters to me. Your happiness matters to me. Not because I'm trying to earn points or because I want something from you, but because I care about you as a person. You never have to be afraid to disagree with me or tell me what you want. That's not how relationships should work, and I promise you, that's not how ours will work." I cried that night, not from sadness, but from relief. Relief that healthy relationships existed, that men like Daniel existed, that I had done enough work on myself to recognize him and be open to him when he came along. My therapist later told me that this was a crucial moment in my healing, the moment when I started to truly believe that what happened with Marcus was an aberration, not the norm. That violence and control were not inevitable parts of romantic relationships. That I deserved kindness and respect, and that these things were actually available to me. Please take a moment to subscribe if you believe in sharing stories of healing and hope. We're building something meaningful here, a space where real experiences lead to real growth, and your subscription helps us reach more people who might need to hear these stories. Click that button and help us get to 1,000 subscribers. My family adored Daniel from the moment they met him. My father, who had become somewhat protective and suspicious of any man I dated after Marcus, relaxed visibly in Daniel's presence. They bonded over their shared love of baseball and spent an entire afternoon watching a game and discussing statistics. My mother pulled me aside after that first family dinner and said, "He's good for you. I can see it in your eyes. You're not performing or pretending or trying to be someone you're not. You're just you, comfortable and happy." Emma, always the most direct of my siblings, told Daniel flat out that if he ever hurt me, she would make his life hell. He took it in stride, told her he respected her protective instincts, and promised he had no intention of hurting me. The relationship progressed naturally, without pressure or artificial timelines. We didn't rush into anything. We took time to really know each other, to see how we handled stress and disappointment and mundane daily life together. We talked about our values, our goals, our fears, our past mistakes. Daniel shared his own relationship history with me, including a painful breakup that had taught him important lessons about communication and compromise. He was refreshingly honest about his flaws and his areas of growth, never pretending to be perfect, but always showing up as his authentic self. One particularly meaningful moment came about 5 months into our relationship. We were at his apartment, cooking dinner together, when he accidentally knocked over a glass of red wine. It shattered on his kitchen floor, splashing wine everywhere, including on my white sweater. For a split second, I tensed, waiting for anger or blame or some indication that this was somehow my fault. But Daniel just groaned, said, "Damn it, I'm so clumsy," and immediately started cleaning up. He apologized for ruining my sweater, insisted on paying to have it professionally cleaned, and turned the whole incident into a joke about his lack of coordination. The relief I felt was profound. This was what normal looked like. Accidents happened, and they were just accidents, not catastrophes or opportunities for abuse. I shared this observation with Daniel later that night, explaining how Marcus would have reacted to a similar situation. Daniel's face darkened with anger, but he kept his voice gentle as he said, "I hate that you have to compare normal human behavior to what you went through with him. You shouldn't be surprised when someone doesn't yell at you or blame you for an accident. That should be the baseline, not something remarkable. He was right, of course, but I was still learning to recalibrate my expectations, still learning that kindness and respect were not extraordinary gifts but basic requirements. As my 1-year anniversary of the canceled wedding approached, I felt an unexpected mixture of emotions. Part of me wanted to ignore the date entirely, to pretend it had no significance. Part of me wanted to mark it somehow, to acknowledge how far I had come. I talked to my therapist about it, and she suggested I create some kind of ritual that felt meaningful to me, something that honored my journey without dwelling on the trauma. I decided to organize a women's empowerment workshop at the domestic violence shelter, where I volunteered. I invited several speakers, including a lawyer who specialized in protective orders, a self-defense instructor, and a financial planner who helped women achieve economic independence. I also created a small art installation featuring some of my paintings alongside written testimonials from survivors. The event was scheduled for the exact day of my would-have-been anniversary, transforming a date that could have been painful into an opportunity to help others. The workshop was incredibly successful. More than 60 women attended, ranging from teenagers to seniors. They asked questions, shared their stories, and connected with each other in powerful ways. Several women approached me privately to thank me for organizing the event, saying they had been feeling isolated and hopeless before coming. One young woman, barely 20 years old, told me she had been planning to go back to her abusive boyfriend because she didn't think she had any other options. The workshop had shown her resources she didn't know existed and given her hope that she could build a different life. Your subscription helps us continue creating and sharing content that makes a real difference. We're not just telling stories here. We're building a community of people who believe in empowerment, healing, and growth. Please click that subscribe button and be part of reaching our goal of 1,000 subscribers. At the end of the workshop, I stood up to close the event. Looking out at all those faces, seeing the hope and determination in their eyes, I felt an overwhelming sense of purpose. 1 year ago today, I said, I was supposed to be celebrating my first wedding anniversary. Instead, I'm here with all of you, celebrating something much more important, the strength we all have inside us to choose better for ourselves. Every woman in this room has survived something difficult. Every woman here has made hard choices, or is preparing to make them. And every woman here deserves to know that she is not alone, she is not weak, and she is not to blame for the violence or control she has experienced. You are survivors. You are warriors. And you are worthy of love, respect, and safety. The applause that followed felt like affirmation, not just for them, but for me. I had taken my worst day and transformed it into something meaningful. I had taken my pain and used it to help others. The anniversary that could have been a reminder of loss became instead a celebration of growth and purpose. Daniel had helped set up the workshop but stayed in the background during the event, understanding that this was my moment and my space. Afterward, as we cleaned up, he told me how proud he was of me. You could have spent today bitter and angry, he said. Instead, you spent it helping people. That says everything about who you are. His words meant more to me than he probably realized. Having someone in my life who celebrated my strength rather than feeling threatened by it was still a relatively new experience, and I didn't take it for granted. That night, my family came over to my apartment for a quiet dinner. We didn't talk about Marcus or the wedding that wasn't. Instead, we talked about the workshop, about the women I had met, about the positive impact the event seemed to have. My father raised his glass and made a toast to Caroline, who turned her worst day into her greatest strength. We are so proud of the woman you've become and the woman you continue to become. We clinked glasses, and I felt a profound sense of peace. I had not just survived, I had thrived. I had taken control of my narrative and written a new ending. The legal consequences for Marcus continued to unfold over that first year and beyond. The assault charge I filed resulted in him having to attend court-mandated anger management classes and serve community service hours. He also received a restraining order that prohibited him from coming within 500 feet of me. His employment situation never fully recovered. The financial firm that had fired him was prominent enough that word spread through the industry, and other companies were hesitant to hire someone with a documented history of violence. I heard through mutual acquaintances that he eventually had to leave the finance sector entirely and find work in a completely different field at a much lower salary. Part of me wondered if I should feel guilty about the extent to which his life had fallen apart. But my therapist helped me understand that these were not consequences I had imposed on him. They were natural results of his own actions. I didn't ruin his life. He ruined his own life by choosing to hit me in front of 200 witnesses. Every door that closed for him closed because of his violence, not because of my response to that violence. I had simply protected myself and held him accountable. What happened to him after that was the world responding appropriately to his behavior. Marcus's family, particularly his parents, went through their own reckoning. His mother tried to reach out to me several more times over the months following our last conversation, always through intermediaries or written letters that my attorney screened. She seemed desperate for forgiveness, not for Marcus, but for herself, for having raised a son capable of such violence. I felt sympathy for her situation, but I maintained my boundary. Her healing was not my responsibility. Her son's actions were not my burden to help her process. She would have to find peace with this situation on her own terms, just as I had found peace on mine. If this story is resonating with you, please show your support by subscribing. We're creating a space where difficult stories can be told and heard, where healing is celebrated and strength is recognized. Help us reach 1,000 subscribers by clicking that button right now. Interestingly, I received messages from several of Marcus's friends and even some family members over time, people thanking me for exposing who he really was. His cousin reached out about 8 months after the wedding to tell me that Marcus had a history of aggressive behavior that the family had minimized and excused for years. Apparently, he had pushed a girlfriend in high school, had punched walls during arguments in college, had shown signs of escalating anger throughout his 20s. But the family had always made excuses, blamed stress or alcohol or the other person, never holding Marcus accountable. Seeing him publicly exposed and facing real consequences was, according to the cousin, the first time anyone in the family had been forced to confront the truth about him. This information both validated my experience and made me sad for all the other women who had likely encountered Marcus's violence before me. How many of them had stayed silent? How many had been gaslit into thinking they were overreacting? How many had blamed themselves? I would never know, but I hoped that my public stand had given them some measure of validation, had shown them that they were not wrong to be afraid or upset, that Marcus's behavior was unacceptable and always had been. My art continued to be a source of healing and connection. The small solo show at the local gallery that I mentioned earlier turned into a larger exhibition at a more prestigious venue. I titled the collection Reclamation, and it featured pieces that documented my emotional journey from the wedding day through the months of rebuilding afterward. The centerpiece was a large canvas I had worked on for months, showing a woman walking away from a dark, chaotic background toward a bright, open space. The woman's posture was proud and determined, her head held high. I titled it The Walk, and it became the most talked about piece in the show. A local newspaper did a feature on the exhibition, and the journalist asked if she could include my backstory about the wedding. I hesitated, worried about being defined by that one moment for the rest of my life. But ultimately, I agreed, believing that visibility and honesty were important. The article came out with a headline that read, "Artist Turns Wedding Day Assault into Powerful Statement on Survival." It included a photo of me standing next to the walk, with my head held high, just like the woman in the painting. The response to the article was overwhelming. I received hundreds of messages on social media from women sharing their own stories. Some had left abusive relationships. Some were still in them and looking for courage. Some had daughters or sisters or friends they were worried about. The common thread in all these messages was gratitude for my honesty and admiration for my strength. Several women said that seeing my story had given them permission to leave their own dangerous situations. One woman told me that she had shown the article to her teenage daughter, who was in an abusive relationship with her high school boyfriend, and it had been the catalyst for her daughter finally ending things. These messages reinforced something I had come to understand deeply. Our stories matter. The things we survive and how we survive them can become lifelines for other people. By refusing to hide in shame, by speaking openly about what Marcus did and how I responded, I was creating a roadmap that other women could follow. Not every detail would be the same for them, but the core principle remained. You have the right to walk away from abuse immediately, publicly, decisively, without apology or explanation. Please take a second to click that subscribe button. We're so close to our goal of 1,000 subscribers, and your support makes all the difference. Join this community of people who believe in the power of truth and the importance of standing up for yourself and others. 2 years after the wedding that wasn't, I was invited to speak at a women's conference about domestic violence awareness. The organizers had read the article about my art show and thought my story would resonate with their audience. I was terrified to accept. Speaking to a crowd of strangers about the worst day of my life felt exposing and vulnerable in a way that even the art show hadn't. But Daniel encouraged me, and my therapist thought it would be an important step in my healing journey, so I agreed. The day of the conference, I stood backstage waiting for my turn to speak, my hands shaking and my heart pounding. There were over 300 women in that auditorium, all there to learn about recognizing abuse, supporting survivors, and creating change in their communities. When my name was called, I walked out onto that stage, looked at all those faces, and suddenly felt calm. These were my people. These were women who understood, who had survived their own traumas, who were here because they believed that speaking truth could change lives. I told my story from beginning to end, not leaving out any details. I described the red flags I had ignored during my relationship with Marcus. I recounted the moment of the slap in vivid detail, not to be gratuitous, but to help people understand the shock and the choice I had faced. I explained my decision to walk away immediately and the consequences that followed for both Marcus and me. I talked about the healing process, the setbacks and the victories, the work it took to rebuild my sense of self. And I ended by telling them about my life now, about the healthy relationship I was in, about the art I was creating, about the work I was doing at the shelter, about how the worst day of my life had ultimately led me to my best life. The standing ovation that followed was unexpected and emotional. Women came up to me afterward, many of them crying, all of them wanting to share their own stories or ask for advice or simply say thank you. I stayed for hours, long after my speaking slot was supposed to end, talking to these women and listening to them. Each conversation reminded me why I had agreed to speak in the first place. These women needed to know they weren't alone. They needed to see an example of someone who had walked away and survived and thrived. They needed permission to believe they were worth protecting.